Good morning and welcome to another edition of 15 Minutes of Flame. This is Robert Phoenix. How is everybody today? 7th of February, just 7 short days away from Valentine's Day. Does everybody have their Valentine's Day gift picked out? You don't want to screw that one up. If you are in a relationship, yeah, I know it's a Hallmark holiday, but it is what it is, as they say. You better cross that threshold or beware. Oh boy, here we go. We're kind of getting back on track now after the Super Bowl. The only thing that's happened in the aftermath of the Super Bowl is, well, two things. Number one, Josh McDaniels, who was a coach for the New England Patriots, decided that he was not going to become the coach for the Indianapolis Colts. Colts have had some bad juju in the last 48 hours. 72 hours just before the Super Bowl, they lost linebacker Edwin Jackson to an accident where he was on the side of the road with an Uber driver, and there was a guy who had incredibly high alcohol level content in his bloodstream and veered off the road and smashed into them and killed them both. This guy had been deported twice, so now Edwin Jackson is going to become the poster child, or the poster guy, he's not a child, the poster man for Trump in his ongoing battle with both the Democrats and the Republicans around immigration and immigration reform. It'll be interesting to see what happens here, because if he winds up bringing Edwin Jackson's family into a speech and they're supporting him, it'll be very interesting kind of threshold, because number one, he's an NFL player, or was, and we know that Trump was very harsh on the NFL and the players who were kneeling instead of standing. So now we have a player kind of crossing a threshold, or the family of a player, and then he's also African American, right? He's black. So now we have a black family and the family of a football player who theoretically could. So, and I'm not saying they will. But it's a heavy blow, man. It's a totally heavy blow. And Edwin Jackson was not a first tier player. He was a special teamer and a backup linebacker. And that's probably what he was going to be pretty much destined to be, a guy that maybe could get about 4 or 5 years out of the NFL, annual salary of maybe about $600,000, probably right around there, $500 to $600,000. If he's lucky, if he's a really good special teams player, he'll make a little bit more than that. But for most families whose sons play in the NFL, that's big money. That's big money. That's getting mama out of a crappy house into a nicer house money. So that's a blow. That's a blow to their family. And not to mention the Uber guy. I mean, Edwin Jackson was not the only person who died in this tragic event. There's also the Uber driver. So this is kind of a big deal in terms of politicizing what happened. And we know that Trump has no problem politicizing these events. We go back to Kate Steinle and what happened with her. And I believe actually played a role in helping Trump get elected. So this is going to be interesting now as they wrangle and try to cajole and coerce around DACA. And the DACA and the immigration issue looms large, because I believe if Trump does not win according to his electorate and his base, that it will not go well for the president. It will not. Because again, from an astrological perspective, he's got Saturn going through his 5th house. No fun for Donald. The Saturn 5th house transit is not fun. It's just not fun. Having Saturn in the 5th house natally, the best thing you can say about that is your fun comes later. Anyway, we talked about this before. He's got those 3 planets in Cancer, Mercury, Venus, Saturn, and he's going to have Saturn begin to oppose those planets. And those 3 planets, Mercury, Venus, and Saturn, those are his electorate. Those are his base. The Cancerian base in the 11th house. So there's going to be a very interesting dance here with Trump and the immigration question. Now, apparently, this is what I've been reading. Again, we have to just understand what's going on here. And we have to begin to develop a bit of a dispassionate sense. And ask ourselves, is this really in the best interest of our country? And I put country in question marks. Or, I'm sorry, quotes. Not question marks, it could be rhetorical. In quotes. Because, and this is a really, I think, fundamental piece here. If immigration is, for the most part, comes in unchecked and unabated, that essentially means that we don't really exist as a country. Do you understand the algorithm around that? Because for all intents and purposes, it has the feel of a place that has open borders. So when we use the word country, which, by the way, I'm surprised it hasn't been banned yet, but when you use the word country, it defines a geographical area. And that geographical area is governed by, guess what? Borders and laws. And yeah, can they be arbitrary? Of course they can. Do the multinationals get away with redefining what those boundaries and laws are? Of course, and they have for a long time. There seems to be a number of different rules that exist for one group and don't exist for another. Am I right? That's true. So we have to take some of this into account. It's not as kind of black and white as we would like it to be, but on the other token, we have to abide by a certain set of rules that are dictated by the country that we live in. I'll give you an example. Okay? So let's just say, for instance, you were in a bad spot. And you were unemployed for a while, and you had to really figure out where your money was going to go. And it could either go to child support or keep a roof over your head and try to catch up on child support. Okay? And this is a thing that happens to people. They have to make choices. Well, guess what? If you fall too far behind, and that too far is $2,500, your right to travel is revoked. You cannot travel outside the country. Because at that point, the government, or the country, as defined by the government, now says, you pose a threat. Because if you leave, there's a good chance that the state that has reported you is not going to get its share of that money. So it falls under the rubric of asset forfeiture, asset seizure, and kind of bleeds into this whole idea of, debtors' prisons in some ways, right? Now, you're not necessarily in a prison, but the prison is big. The prison becomes the country, and you cannot leave the country. So now the borders exist. So this is the world that we live in. I'm just giving you one example, and there are more. It's fascinating. Anyway, now what's happening is that apparently there's another kind of tranche of refugees coming in from North Africa, specifically I believe Somalia, that are carrying some very virulent strains of TB. And the rumor, the word in the street, and I'm not bringing this up to be an alarmist, but also Ebola. And these people are coming into the country. The country, right? The country. Yes. The country that does have borders, and those borders defining who and what you can do inside the country. I just gave you one example. There's more. So on the one hand, we have our president, Gemini on steroids, talking tough about immigration, and no doubt will politicize the event with Edwin Jackson. And on the other hand, we have a whole group of people coming in. And apparently what happens is they wind up going to Malta. Because Malta is not far from Africa. And the Maltese will not have any of them. And so they ship them off as soon as they land. I wonder if they're making any money. I mean, this is weird. It's almost like it's this new modern version of slave trading. You know, it's just bizarre because there are agencies that make money off moving these bodies around. Like, they make money, and it's all under the premise or the guise that they're being kind and compassionate, and, you know, I'm sure they're connected to things like Catholic Charity. I mean, I don't know. I don't have the flow chart in front of me, but I do know that there are groups that profit off of this. And it almost feels like a modern-day version of the slave trade. Because there are people that are moving bodies around. And they are making money. And so this is going on, and it's pretty much unabated, and nobody's really talking about it. And yet, we're going to be dealing with the DACA stuff. It's just so, this is a very interesting and I think noteworthy thing to look at and begin to dissect and deconstruct. You can hear the familiar today making her presence known. The diva of 15 Minutes of Flame has walked into the studio. Anyway, just, you know, I don't often talk about the immigration piece because I do think it's a pretty volatile one. And I really feel like we need to go back to, like, pre-Bush, pre-Johnson mandates around immigration. That's my 2 cents. And if we want to fix the problem with the countries. Zero out their debt. Give them a fighting chance. Give them one-time loans that are non-repayable. And then walk away. That's my walk away. But the problem is, and here's the big problem, and I talked about it before, is that the United States now is in competition for resources with China and Russia. And China has done an extremely good job in farming out their technology and their ability to build infrastructure in places like Africa. So if you are in this idea that there's this model that we're competing with on a global level, on a global scale for more precious metals, right? The stuff that, rare metals, the stuff that we put in our cell phones. So we can have more cell phones, so we can be enslaved more by the technology. Then we have to get out there and roll up our sleeves and be in the same marketplace as the Chinese and the Russians or whoever else. Or we could just get into more free energy and more advanced technology, which we know they have. We absolutely know they have. And that would be a game changer. It's like, come on, China, keep up with this. Ha! Gotcha. But they're not ready to do that yet, are they? Nope. But I'll tell you where they are using technology, and this is kind of the bulk of the show today, is they're using technology on Wall Street. Yep, that's right, Wall Street. And I ran across this this story on the Washington Post, which I want to read. It's very interesting. It gives us a sense as to what happens or what's happening in the markets, and specifically the Dow and NASDAQ and all that stuff. So the robots versus robots trading that has hijacked the stock market. And again, this is from the Washington Post. It's from today. I want to read it to you. It's been comical to watch the parade of guests on the business news channels this week try to explain to viewers and to one another why our hyper-efficient financial markets, the ones that are supposed to be so brilliant at pricing the value of everything, have been bouncing around like squash ball in an overheated court. Pay no attention to the volatility. These financial wizards assure us. Yeah, they're all over the place. It's just a little technical correction, a bit of froth being taken off the top of a market that had gotten a bit ahead of itself. The fundamentals of our otherwise sound economy will soon reassert themselves. Why is it that when the market is climbing by improbable leaps and bounds month after month, that we are supposed to take that as a genuine reflection of the fundamentals? But when the market is in a free fall, we are supposed to write that off as a momentary fit of, or as momentary fits of irrationality. The truth is that the market is just as irrational and divorced from fundamentals on the way up as it is on the way down. It is in the nature of markets more so today than ever, thanks to computerized high-frequency trading strategies of the Wall Street wise guys. What we've watched this week is herd behavior on steroids. It's important to remember that a small fraction of the trades on stock markets these days, maybe 10%, are made by real-life human beings deciding to buy or sell shares in this or that company. Another 40% or so reflect decisions to invest in the entire stock market or an entire industry or an entire class of companies. Index funds, exchange-traded funds, also known as ETFs, or other kinds of passive investments. That leaves half the trading that is done automatically by computers, according to complex algorithms that focus on changes in market prices or indices caused by the trading done by other computers. In this kind of robot versus robot trading with its circular logic, fundamentals are irrelevant. The volumes are enormous and the holding periods are often a matter of minutes or even seconds. More often than not, a trade is likely to be a combination of trades. Buying this stock, shorting that ETF while selling a call option on some derivative instrument, and almost all of it done with borrowed money. One theory about Monday's 1,000-point plunge in the Dow Jones Industrial Average had something to do with a trade that shorted an ETF tied to a volatility index, which forced the sponsor of the ETF, Credit Suisse, to buy some huge number of futures contracts to balance out its exposure. The instrument goes by the name of Velocity Shares Daily Inverse, VIX Short-Term Exchange Traded Note, or XIV for short. In all honesty, I can't explain what any of that means, but it apparently created a vicious cycle in which selling begat more selling and wound up wiping out nearly $3 billion in valuation for investors. Credit Suisse has now announced it would soon stop trading in the instrument, which in hindsight seems like only the sporting thing to do. So just to break it down, we had an AI that was being deployed by Credit Suisse, which partially caused the havoc on the market. In my wildest imagination, I don't know why these products exist. Devish Shah, the financial whiz who invented VIX, so he doesn't know why they exist, but he invented it, told Bloomberg this week, who do they benefit? No one, except if someone wants to gamble. Aside from the gambling aspect, the rationale put forward for these ridiculously complex instruments and trading strategies is that they reduce price volatility and increase market liquidity, which is true except when it is not, which is precisely at those moments of market panic. Instead of hedging risk, which is often the reason why people buy these instruments, they wind up increasing risks for those who own them and the market in general. This is particularly true in a market such as this one, where the amount of trading done with borrowed money is higher than it has ever been, thanks to the low interest rate policies of the major central banks that allow hedge funds to borrow $4 or $5 million for every one of their own they put at risk. When prices start to fall rapidly, the funds are forced to sell their positions to pay back the banks and the brokerage houses. That's margin. They're buying on margin, right? Driving down the price even further. Selling begets yet more selling, investors rushing to covering of short positions or to sell underwater options before they expire, run into a similar dynamic. So this is the same kind of conditions that were in place when the first depression hit. It's the same thing. All of a sudden they had these call loans. The call loans went into action all at once, and it was like a burning building. People were trying to get out, and they couldn't get out in time. Burning building. That's the metaphor. And by the way, apparently the story goes is that Winston Churchill was brought into Wall Street the day that the market crashed. He was brought there and shown what was going to happen. by the bankers. I believe it was Jacob Schiff, if I'm not mistaken. Or it could have been Loeb Kuhn, but I believe it was Schiff. And he watched what happened in horror. They had a front row seat. Same deal. Same conditions exist. But now with these computers, theoretically, they can make trades and get out faster. They can get out faster, and by having the computers look at all of their options. Okay, the AI looks at all the options. This is what this guy is saying. Looks at all the options and says, okay, we're going to lose a bunch of money over here. But if we do X, Y, and Z, we get to cover the shortfall by doing this, this, and this. And so we're creating basically a real-time hedge against any volatility. But what happens now is you've got 50% of the market with these various tools that are out there doing the same thing. And so let's say they all decide that they're going to go over in this direction, and they're going to sell off over here in order to take care of the black hole that's developing over here. And now all of a sudden you've got 50% of the market all kind of doing the same thing because it's written into the program. It's part of how it's going to cover its risk and amortize any other hedges that are part of the portfolio. And if they stack up and collide, which you have, is an avalanche. And it's done by computers. It's done by artificial intelligence. When prices start to fall rapidly, the funds are forced to sell their positions to pay back the banks and the brokerage houses, driving down the price even further. Selling begets yet more selling, which is exactly what I was talking about. Investors rushing to covering of short positions or to sell underwater options before they expire run into a similar dynamic. And of course, what happens with one asset class can affect what happens in all the others. A bubble in Bitcoin, for example, can stir what John Maynard Keynes called the market's animal spirits, encouraging investors to take risks and bid up the price of stocks or real estate or fine arts. And it works in reverse when fear replaces greed. There's no rational reason why the collapse in Bitcoin prices from 19,500 to 7,500 has any rational connection to stock prices. But as Keynes understood, investors and markets are not rational. In truth, there is no reason that a financial system has to be this complex and so volatile. So, okay, let's stop right there. Let's try to link up Bitcoin and the market. So let's say, for instance, your program or your AI isn't just linked to the market. Let's say it's linked to Bitcoin. I mean, that's a real possibility. And you don't think the big boys and the investors got in on Bitcoin early on? Of course they did. Of course. Absolutely. So in order to cover the shortfall of an overall portfolio, why wouldn't they be selling off in Bitcoin? Why wouldn't that happen? It would happen. And I believe that this is one of the reasons why Bitcoin would drop in price. That's my sense. Okay, because there was a big rush and a big push to get assets out of Bitcoin and into whatever other kind of exchange they could in order to cover shortfall or move it around and get back into the market. Again, all done within a matter of seconds and minutes with these programs. In truth, there's no reason that a financial system has to be this complex and so volatile. There's no reason us to divert so much of the country's talent and capital and to siphon off so much for traders and bankers and hedge fund managers. With a bit of intelligent regulation, we could have a financial system that is simpler, less risky, less expensive, and less susceptible to manipulation. So when we get risk, less risk means what? Less reward. So people want maximal risk. If you're a trader, you want maximal risk so you can have maximal profit. Okay? That is the law of the jungle. And then what you do is you go about and find a way to somehow shave points off your risk. Okay? That's what you do. You shave points off the risk while maintaining profit maximalization. And that's where we get into stuff like insider trading and all the other things that have gone on in terms of chicanery. But you, as a trader, you want maximal risk for for maximal profit. You have more intervention and less risk, and ultimately puts a ceiling on your profit. And as we know and have seen, people generally who are in the marketplace want as many governors removed from that process as possible. One last little paragraph here. There is a cost to the kind of financial innovation that produces instruments like the Velocity Shares Daily Inverse or the VIX short-term exchange traded notes. And my guess is that those costs now greatly exceed the benefits. You know, people will just continue, they'll continue to build a better beast, right? That is, it's like, okay, this didn't work out so well. Let's tweak this and let's tweak this and meanwhile, everybody else is tweaking their version of it. So just another look at what happened in the stock market and the forces behind it, which are not really being talked about. AI, robot versus robot. We still have a big circus and carnival now happening around the FISA memo. And this is an incredible piece. Like, we could probably do a whole Friday on it if we wanted to. But this is huge. This is drilling down into how this whole thing happened. I put a post up on Facebook that has the flow chart for the memo and where it started, where it began, the hands that it passed through. And apparently there's a second dossier. They have a second Steele dossier. This is amazing stuff. And now the Democrats, of course, want to release their own version because they are really fighting for their lives here. I mean, if there's any kind of real justice, real justice, not this fake, phony, dog and pony BS kangaroo court justice. If there's any real justice, there are people that are going to go to jail. They're going to go to jail. They're going to go to prison based on this. This is a conspiracy. It's a total conspiracy that was built and based on a fraudulent document. Now, if they can somehow prove that dossier is correct, then all of a sudden they have a smoking gun, which goes back to the whole Russia thing. But the problem is that they've not been able to show that dossier has any kind of relevance. It was paid for by the DNC as research, right? They were trying to get into Trump and find out what was going on, and they paid this guy, Christopher Steele, to create that memo or the dossier in relationship with Fusion GPS and Bruce Orr and his wife. And it went through Rod Rothstein, who I believe, if I'm not mistaken, was there when Obama was there. He's an Obama holdover as part of the DOJ. Rothstein has got to have a target on his back at this point in time. By the way, have you noticed that we haven't seen a lot of Jeff Sessions lately or heard from him? I think that's interesting as well. Oh, here we go. Newsweek fires top editor. Staffer is told to go home. Very interesting development. Another organ of the fake news industry taking a huge hit. I don't want to get into the scandal there, but it has to do with taking money and money laundering and all kinds of dirty stuff. I mean, we're going to find out. We're going to find out what's going on here, and we have been with the news agencies, which are basically, have been forever, arms of the CIA. I'll never forget, I was at a talk in Berkeley, and it was the late Gary Webb. Late Gary Webb, who was the guy who broke the story on the CIA and cocaine, and bringing cocaine into the United States as part of Iran-Contra and all kinds of other stuff. Dark Alliance was the famous Gary Webb book. I remember. It was right around, 90, 97, 98, right around there. And the internet was just really kind of taking off. And the San Jose Mercury was running his stuff on the CIA, and his big informant was Freeway Ricky Ross, who was a young guy living in South Central, and he became a point person for setting up crack houses around the country. That was his job, and in helping basically the distribution side of things so that they could have their black budget money. Anyway, these dispatches from Gary Webb on the San Jose Mercury website were going through the roof. They were sending all kinds of records for hits and views in the early days of the internet. And eventually, Gary's hard work landed him at the city desk in Los Gatos, where there's absolutely nothing that ever happens. Can you imagine that? You're breaking the story of the century. Okay, the story of the century. And you've had, I don't know how many, about 5 or 6 chapters of this thing. And then all of a sudden, it's like, you got to shut it down. And by the way, we're moving you over to the Los Gatos City beat. You go from having your tiger on the tail, the tiger by the tail, with the story of the century, for going to cover absolutely nothing in the city of Pussycats, Los Gatos. So Gary Webb soldiered on for a while. He wrote his book, Dark Alliance, and there's been a lot of stuff that came out of it. The movie Traffic was inspired by it. Part of it is in the movie. And me and my buddy saw Gary Webb one night at a middle school in Berkeley. And we heard him talk about the experience, and he answered questions about his sources and all that stuff. And it was an interesting night. But the most interesting part was the guy that sat next to us. And he said, this guy was, he was your kind of typical Mel Gibson character from like Conspiracy Theory. He was interesting. And he said that the CIA, like if you go to every single major newspaper and network in this country, that there is somebody from the CIA that is embedded. So they're generally like a city editor, or they're a head editor, managing editor, news editor. Sometimes it could be a director at a TV station. And so by employing operatives in these various positions all across the country, they can control the flow of content and news. And so if they want to push a story, they push it. If they want to kill a story, they'll kill it. And this is how the news is controlled. And when they get to that level, when they get to that part of the structure and the granularity around that, then you know that we're close to completely cracking the code and splitting the atom of not just fake news, but state news, propaganda, and ultimately mind control. It's true. That's how people's minds are controlled. You think it's a big, scary kind of, brain wipe and dealing with cell phone towers and all that stuff, and we walk around in a trance and having thoughts that aren't ours. Yeah, some of that is in there. But sometimes it's really as simple as getting you to think a certain way about a certain piece of content so that your attitude is swayed and you vote a certain way and you buy a certain way. When we get to that level and we begin to pull this back layer by layer and see the actual network at work, then we're getting somewhere. Then we are getting somewhere, because now we're exposing what really happens. And you know the story. If you don't know the story, I'll share it again. I was hanging out one time with Jay Widener in Colorado. I miss Jay, by the way. I haven't had a lot of contact with Jay over the last couple of years, but I miss him. Anyway, I was hanging out with Jay, and Jay had done this very interesting show with Jesse Ventura. You can find it on the internet. I think it was on that True Network, which is the True Law Network or True Crime Network, whatever they called it. And he and Jesse were exploring the Denver airport and what went on there and the amount of dirt that was moved and all the great conspiracy. So anyway, off camera, Jesse Ventura told him that after he was elected governor of Minnesota, on his first day, he walks into his office and his aide says, Mr. Ventura, we need to go downstairs. There's some people that want to meet you. He's like, oh, okay. So the aide takes him down below the Capitol in Minnesota. He walks into this room and he sees about 25 people in the room, 25, 30 people, and he recognizes almost every single one of them. And he recognizes them as the person that takes his laundry, the person that makes his coffee, the person that brings his mail. Yeah, that's right. Who are these people? Well, they work for the CIA, and they wanted to know more about him. Like, who really are you? How did you get here? So this was shocking for him. And I wanted to just share that with you because it's kind of a look behind the scenes as to, how things are embedded in our society. From the news perspective, from the media perspective, even all the way down to on a personal daily level. And this is not so you can raise your eyebrow in suspicion at the person that's making your Subway sandwich. But it's just an interesting kind of factoid to know about and understand. Anyway, this is a very interesting time, and let's see what's going to happen here as we hurtle through space with the latest and greatest conspiracy ricocheting around the media and our brains, and hopefully with some resolution. That would be great to actually resolve something at some point in time. So it's not this open-ended kind of yawning piece of let's see, we got information and conspiracy. We got a little comment here in the chat room. What's that about? Oh, Judy says, yeah, I finally caught you right at the onset. Hey, the timing is good. 9/11 today, by the way. I've been up early. My day starts early. I am dedicated to the cause. Between 5:30 and 6, yours truly is up. And that may not sound like much, but it certainly gives me a good start of the day. All right. With that, I believe we're winding it down. Pulling it into the station, as it were. All right. So take care of yourself out there. There's a lot of contagion and plague. A lot of it. Take care of yourself, and that means across all areas of your life. Spiritual, emotional, physical. Keep that flame burning. Keep it alive. Don't let anybody snuff it out or desecrate it. It's the most important thing you have in this lifetime. All right. Use your head to discern what's real, your heart to step when it's possible. I'm Robert Phoenix, and here's the closing music of the show. I'll see you tomorrow.